Hey Sophie, wat heb je nou weer met je haar gedaan? Sorry, maar ik vind dit echt niet mooi. That was my Dutch cousin telling me that she really disliked my new haircut, far more directly than what I usually experience with my American friends. Although my entire extended family lives in the Netherlands, I was born in Texas. So the American style of communication has become my norm. But this remark has helped me realize that there is more to understanding a foreigner than just mastering their language. The importance of understanding one another becomes clear when we look around this tournament. America is a melting pot of distinct cultures. For example, in my small debate club near Houston, we have families with roots in 5 different countries: the Netherlands, Argentina, Canada, the United States, and Texas. Raising our cultural IQ, therefore, is not optional, but essential. Because a lack of understanding of the ways members from different cultures communicate results in the judging, disrespecting, and devaluing the people around us. So today, I will share with you 2 factors that influence how a culture communicates, so that we'll better understand and appreciate each other. The first factor examines the context of cultures. There are low and there are high context cultures. People in a low context culture will use precise language to tell you whatever they are thinking or feeling in a direct or frank way. They will often repeat themselves, so that helps clarify the communication. 2 examples of low context countries are the Netherlands and the United States. In 2014, in her book The Culture Map, Erin Meyer, an American author and professor at an international business school, defined a low context culture as, quote, tell them what you were going to tell them, then tell them what you told them, end quote. If this concept sounds familiar to you, that is because Americans often repeat themselves to make sure that there are no misunderstandings. Americans often repeat themselves. To illustrate this, one of my piano friends had a scheduling conflict, so we agreed upon switching lesson times. In the following days, I received multiple messages asking if the new time will still work for me. This is a prime example of how low context cultures communicate. They make sure that there are no miscommunications. People in a high context culture, however, speak in a subtle manner, and many of their messages are implied. Because high context communication is layered, it is challenging for people from low context cultures to understand. China is one of the highest context countries in the world. To understand the Chinese, one must discover the speaker's actual meaning. In China, you seldom hear the absolutes such as yes, no, or never. Why is that? Well, high context people feel condescending and impolite if they use these specific words. The contrast between low and high context communication is clear. The high context Chinese prefer not to use the absolutes, while the low context Americans are straight to the point. One of the reasons why cultures are either more low or more high context depends on its history. A high context culture like China has a homogeneous population and thousands of years of shared history. Over those years, people have become adept in identifying implied messages. The United States, however, only has a few hundred years of shared history. Immigrants from various cultures populated our country, all with different backgrounds and languages. Because they had little shared context, it was necessary to be as clear as possible when communicating. The second factor that affects how a culture communicates hinges on a culture's social structure. Some cultures are more egalitarian, and others are more hierarchical. In an egalitarian society, the gap between the boss and his employees is small. A hierarchical society, however, contains a considerable distance between the superior and his subordinates. The Netherlands is one of the most egalitarian countries in the world. This is demonstrated when the Dutch Prime Minister, Mark Rutte, is seen casually riding his bike to Parliament. The Dutch appreciate it when their leader appears among them as an average member of society. On the other hand, if a Korean government official biked to his office, the Korean population would be ashamed. In their culture, biking is for the lower classes. If you notice a person of high rank biking to his work in Korea, keep in mind that he is probably a foreigner. He could even be a Dutchman. When my parents moved from the Netherlands to the United States, it became increasingly evident to my dad that the American workplace was more hierarchical than the Dutch work environment. When my dad started working in America, his boss assigned him a project. Unfortunately, my dad did not complete the assignment since he did not perceive it to be urgent. Later, a colleague said, "When the boss asks you to complete something, do it immediately. Everything he asks you should be your priority." My dad was not accustomed to this approach because the hierarchy in Dutch culture is less strict. In 1978, former American President Jimmy Carter invited the Prime Minister of Israel, Menachem Begin, and the President of Egypt, Anwar Sadat, hoping to find a solution to the years of conflict in the Middle East. These men, representing three distinct cultures, met at the presidential retreat Camp David in Maryland. There were heated arguments between Sadat and Begin, and both were on the verge of leaving the negotiations when Carter intervened. Carter expressed to Begin that future generations depended on these negotiations. He made this clear by showing pictures of Begin's grandchildren to him. Carter described the situation in his book, Keeping Faith. I handed Begin the photographs. He looked at each photograph individually, repeating the names of the grandchildren I had written on it. His lips trembled, and tears welled up in his eyes. We were both emotional as we talked quietly for a few minutes about grandchildren and about war. This exchange illustrates that President Carter did not allow their cultural differences to stop him from seeing the value in future generations. Carter recognized the various ways cultures communicate, allowing him to understand his fellow leaders better. Because of his approach, the Camp David Accords were signed. There are beautiful aspects into every culture, and discovering how cultures communicate is revealing. I imagine cultures to be like individual puzzle pieces. At first, we do not know where the puzzle piece belongs. But if we can understand how it fits, a beautiful picture will form. Much like the church Jesus formed on earth. Let us remember that on the day of Pentecost, the second chapter of Acts tells us that although residents of 16 countries were present for the first telling of the gospel message, quote, "We hear them telling in our own tongues the mighty works of God," end quote. Cultures may affect the way we speak and the way we perceive each other, but it shall never change the fact that we are all made in the image of God. Ultimately, I have learned that there is more at stake in understanding a culture's style of communication than hurt feelings over a critical comment on my appearance. President Carter is a shining example of how to make a connection between people from differing cultures. His kind and insightful approach inspires me, and I hope to one day become a person who can bridge the gap between contrasting viewpoints. So I invite you all today to accompany me on a journey in which we can become people with whom someone from a different culture can be comfortable listening to. Someone with whom they are open to sharing their story. Acting on this new understanding of low and high context, hierarchical and egalitarian societies can contribute to a world with less judgment, more respect, and courtesy. To prevent future misunderstandings, we should begin connecting the separate puzzle pieces to form a unified world. Thank you.